From the moment the little girl limped into Dennis Larouche's auto shop, the front for New Jersey's most feared Mafia operation, the whole place went dead silent. Her pink dress was torn. Her knees were bleeding. She could barely stand. She clutched a worn teddy bear like it was the only thing keeping her alive as she collapsed against the workbench, whispering the 6 words that made even killers go pale. "I can't open my legs." Every man in that garage froze. These were men who had buried bodies without blinking, men who answered to no law. But in that moment, not one of them could move. If that moment hit you. Tap like so more people see this story. Dennis Larouche was not a man who felt fear. Shaved head, neck tattooed with symbols that meant death in 3 languages, arms covered in ink that told stories no one dared ask about. He had built an empire on blood and held it together with silence. Mothers warned their children about him. Police looked the other way when his name came up. But right now, crouched in front of this 6-year-old girl, his hands were shaking. Because Dennis had seen this before. Not this girl, but another one. Years ago. A daughter he couldn't save. A car accident he couldn't stop. A tiny casket he carried alone. And now, staring at Liza Robbins, tears cutting rivers through the dirt on her face, her small body trembling so hard the workbench rattled, something inside him cracked open. Something he had buried deeper than any body. He reached toward her, but even then, his hand stopped mid-air. The most dangerous man in 3 counties was terrified to touch her, terrified he might break her even more. He didn't ask what happened with words. He asked with his eyes. Dark, desperate, begging for something that made sense. And slowly, brokenly, Liza raised one trembling arm and pointed toward the road, toward the long highway that cut through the edge of town, toward the direction she had come from, running, bleeding, alone. "The man," she whispered. "The man tried to take me." Dennis felt something ignite in his chest, something ancient, something savage, protective fury mixed with an ache so deep he could barely breathe. This wasn't just a child in pain. This was a child who had been hunted. If you want more stories that reveal the humanity hiding behind the darkness, subscribe and turn on notifications. No one in that shop knew it yet. Not Dennis, not his men, not even Liza herself. But the name she would whisper next, the face she would describe, would flip this entire town upside down. Because the man who tried to take her wasn't a stranger. He was someone everyone trusted. And when Dennis Larouche found out the truth, nothing in that town would ever be the same again. Dennis Larouche had not knelt before anyone in 23 years. Not before judges, not before rivals, not before the barrel of a gun pressed to his temple in that Newark warehouse back in '09. He had stood his ground, stared death in the face, and walked out while 3 other men didn't. But now, in the oil-stained silence of his own shop, he dropped to his knees like a man who had forgotten how to stand. The girl flinched when he moved. Of course she did. He was a nightmare dressed in flesh. 240 pounds of muscle, ink, and violence. His arms were sleeved in tattoos that told stories in a language only the streets understood. A crown of thorns wrapped around his left bicep. A serpent coiled up his right forearm, its fangs bared, frozen mid-strike. On his neck, just below his jaw, 3 small crosses, one for each man he had killed before his 21st birthday. His hands were weapons, scarred knuckles, thick fingers that had broken bones, crushed windpipes, signed death warrants with a nod. Hands that had never held anything gently. But right now those hands were shaking. "Hey," he whispered. "Hey, sweetheart, look at me." His voice came out wrong. Too soft, too broken. He barely recognized it. Behind him, Victor Caruso and Tommy Briggs stood frozen. Victor was 46 years old, a soldier since he was 17, and he had never, not once, seen Dennis Larouche speak to anyone like this. Tommy's mouth hung open, his cigarette burning forgotten between his fingers, ash falling to the floor in silent gray snowflakes. The girl wouldn't look up. She clutched her teddy bear so tightly the stitching strained. Her whole body trembled like a leaf caught in a hurricane. Tears dripped from her chin onto the workbench, mixing with the blood still drying on her knees. Dennis felt something inside him splinter. He had built walls around himself, walls made of reputation, of fear, of the certain knowledge that softness was death in his world. He had buried every weakness so deep that even he had forgotten where the graves were. But this girl, this tiny, broken, terrified girl, was digging them all up with her tears. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth, like a language he had stopped speaking long ago. "You hear me? Nobody in this room is going to hurt you." Liza's breath hitched. A sob caught in her throat. She still wouldn't look at him. Dennis didn't move closer. He stayed on his knees, arms loose at his sides, making himself as small as a man his size could be. He had learned something in his 43 years. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was move too fast. Animals knew this. Children knew this. People who had been hurt knew this better than anyone. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. Silence, just the sound of her ragged breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside. "That's okay," Dennis said. "You don't gotta talk. You don't gotta do anything. You're safe now. You understand? Whatever happened out there." He gestured vaguely toward the road. "It's over. You're in my house now. And nothing bad happens in my house. It was a lie, of course. Terrible things happened in this shop. Deals were made here that destroyed lives. Orders were given here that ended them. But right now, in this moment, Dennis meant every word." Behind him, Tommy shifted his weight. The floorboard creaked. Liza's head snapped up, and Dennis saw her face for the first time. Really saw it. She had brown hair, tangled and dirty, pulled back in a loose ponytail that had come half undone. Her eyes were dark, wide, wet with tears and something worse, something hollow and hunted. Dirt streaked her cheeks. A small cut on her forehead had crusted over with dried blood. She was so pale she looked almost gray, like the color had been drained out of her by fear. She looked just like Emily. The thought hit Dennis like a bullet to the chest. Emily, his daughter, the one he never talked about, the one whose picture he still kept in the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath stacks of cash and a loaded .45. The one who had been 6 years old when a drunk driver ran a red light and stole her from him forever. Lisa was 6 years old too. Same brown hair, same small face, same age Emily would have been when she... Dennis shut his eyes, breathed, forced the memory down into the darkness where he kept everything that could destroy him. When he opened his eyes again, Liza was staring at him. "Liza," she whispered. Dennis blinked. "What?" "My name." Her voice was so small it barely made a sound. "It's Liza." Something cracked in Dennis's chest. Not broke, cracked, like ice at the start of a thaw, like a door that had been locked for 15 years finally giving way. "Liza," he repeated. He said it gently, carefully, like it was something precious he might drop. "That's a beautiful name." She didn't smile. She didn't relax. But she didn't look away either. Behind him, Victor and Tommy exchanged glances. They had known Dennis for decades. They had seen him order executions without blinking. They had watched him build an empire on blood and silence. But they had never, not once, seen him look at someone the way he was looking at this girl, like she mattered, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Dennis stayed on his knees. He didn't rush, didn't push. He just stayed there, a monster kneeling before a mouse, and waited for her to tell him who had tried to destroy her. Because whoever it was, whatever name she whispered, Dennis Larouche was going to find them. and God himself wouldn't be able to save them from what came next. Dennis had seen injuries before. Gunshots, stab wounds, faces rearranged by brass knuckles. He knew what violence looked like when it was written on the body. But this was different. Liza sat on the edge of the workbench, her small frame curled inward like a flower that had been stepped on. Her legs were pressed together so tightly they trembled from the effort, not crossed, locked, rigid, like her body had frozen in place and forgotten how to move. Dennis leaned in slowly, carefully, the way you approach a wounded animal. "Liza," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, "can you move your legs for me? Just a little?" She shook her head violently. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "It hurts," she whimpered. "It hurts so bad." Dennis's jaw tightened. He glanced down at her knees, scraped raw, crusted with blood and dirt, swollen in a way that didn't look right. The skin around her kneecaps was red, almost purple in places. This wasn't a skinned knee from tripping on the sidewalk. This was something else. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, sweetheart. You don't have to move. Just stay still." He turned his head slightly toward Victor without taking his eyes off the girl. "Get me the first aid kit," he said, "and some water. Cold water." Victor moved immediately, his heavy boots thudding across the concrete floor. Tommy stayed where he was, still frozen, still watching like he was seeing a ghost. Dennis turned back to Liza. She was clutching her teddy bear so hard her knuckles had gone white. The bear was old, matted fur, one button eye loose, stitching coming undone at the seams. It had been loved hard and long, the kind of toy a child slept with every night, the kind that held secrets and absorbed tears. "What's his name?" Dennis asked, nodding towards the bear. Liza blinked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Mr. Buttons," she whispered. "Mr. Buttons." Dennis let the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. "He looks like he's been through some things." Liza's grip tightened. "He protects me." The words hit Dennis like a punch to the gut. He protects me. This child, running through the streets with torn clothes and bleeding knees, had no one to keep her safe except a stuffed bear with a missing eye. Where the hell were her parents? Victor returned with the first aid kit and a bottle of water. Dennis took the water first, cracked the cap, and held it out to Liza. "Here, small sips." She hesitated, looking at the bottle like it might be a trap. Then, slowly, she reached out with one hand, keeping Mr. Buttons clutched tightly in the other, and took it. She drank in desperate gulps, water spilling down her chin. "Slow down," Dennis said gently. "You'll make yourself sick." She didn't listen. She drained half the bottle before she stopped, gasping for air. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes were sunken. How long had she been running? How far had she come? Dennis reached toward her knee, intending to assess the damage. Liza screamed. The sound ripped through the garage like a siren. She recoiled so hard she nearly fell off the workbench, her whole body jerking away from his hand like he had pressed a hot iron to her skin. "Don't touch me!" she shrieked. "Please don't touch me!" Dennis pulled back immediately, both hands raised, palms open. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quickly. "I'm not going to hurt you, Liza. I just wanted to look at your knee, that's all. I won't touch you, I promise." She was sobbing now, full-body sobs that shook her tiny frame. Her legs were still locked together, still rigid, and Dennis could see now that it wasn't just pain keeping them that way. It was fear. Pure animal fear. The kind that seizes your muscles and won't let go. This wasn't a fall. Something happened to this child. Dennis felt a cold rage begin to build in his chest. Slow, quiet, the kind that didn't explode but burned. He had felt this before. The night Emily died. The night he found the drunk driver's address. The night he did things that still visited him in his dreams. "Liza," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to tell me something. Can you do that?" She sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. She nodded weakly. "What happened to you? How did you get hurt?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Her eyes darted towards the open garage door, toward the road beyond, toward something only she could see. Her breathing quickened. Her fingers dug into Mr. Button's fur. Then she spoke. "I was walking home from school," she said, her voice trembling. "Mama said I could walk by myself now because I'm 6. She said big girls can walk 3 blocks. Dennis nodded, encouraging her to continue. "There was a car." Liza's face crumpled. "A white car. It stopped next to me. And the man—" She couldn't finish. Her whole body was shaking again, tremors running through her like electricity. "It's okay," Dennis said. "Take your time." "He tried to grab me." The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. "He opened the door and he tried to pull me inside, but I screamed and I kicked him and I ran and I ran and I ran and I fell and my legs won't—" She broke down completely, burying her face in Mr. Button's matted fur. Dennis didn't move. He didn't breathe. The rage in his chest had turned to ice. "Where, Liza?" His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that came before storms. "Which direction did you run from?" Slowly, shakily, Liza raised one hand and pointed toward the road. "Toward the east side of town. Toward the direction of Maple Street Elementary." Dennis turned to Victor. Their eyes met. No words were necessary. Someone had tried to steal this child, and that someone was still out there. There is a moment, just before violence, when everything goes quiet. Dennis knew that moment well. He had lived in it 100 times. The heartbeat before the trigger pull, the breath before the blade, the silence that settles over a man when he decides someone else is going to die. That silence filled him now. He stood slowly, rising from his knees with the deliberate calm of a predator who has just caught a scent. His face had changed. The softness he had shown Liza was gone, replaced by something older and colder, something that had been sleeping inside him and had just woken up hungry. Victor saw it first. He had known Dennis for 19 years, had stood beside him through wars that never made the news, and he recognized that look. It was the look Dennis wore before bodies started dropping. "Boss?" Victor said carefully. "What do you need?" Dennis didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the road outside the garage door, at the direction Liza had pointed, at the invisible trail of terror she had left behind her. Somewhere out there, a man in a white car was still breathing, still driving, still hunting. That was about to change. "Lock it down," Dennis said. His voice was flat, empty, the voice of a man who had already made his decision. "Every door, every window, nobody in or out until I say so." Tommy moved immediately, stubbing out his cigarette and heading for the side entrance. Victor pulled out his phone, already dialing. "I want eyes on every street between here and Maple Elementary," Dennis continued. "White car, any make, any model. You see it, you follow it. You don't engage, you call me." Victor nodded, phone pressed to his ear. "I'll get Marco and the twins on it. They can cover the east side in 10 minutes. "Do it!" Dennis turned back to Liza. She was still curled on the workbench, still clutching Mr. Buttons, still trembling. But she was watching him now with something new in her eyes. Not fear, or not just fear. Something like hope. Like maybe for the first time since she started running, she had found someone who could make the nightmare stop. That look nearly broke him. He crouched down again, bringing himself to her level. The beast inside him was awake and raging, hungry for blood, but he forced it down, locked it away. There would be time for that later. Right now, this child needed something else. "Liza," he said gently, "you're safe here. My guys are going to make sure no one comes near this place, and we're going to find the man who tried to hurt you. Okay? We're going to find him." She nodded weakly, but Dennis could see she was fading. The adrenaline that had carried her this far was draining out of her, leaving nothing but exhaustion in its wake. He looked at her more closely now, really looked, with the clinical eye of a man who had learned to assess damage. Her lips were dry and cracked, the skin peeling at the corners. Her eyes, ringed with dark circles, had a sunken quality that spoke of more than just fear. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and when she breathed, each inhale seemed to cost her something. How long had she been running? "When did you eat last?" Dennis asked. Liza blinked, confused by the question. I had breakfast, before school." Dennis glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon. She had been running, hiding, terrified for hours. No food, no water beyond what he had just given her. Her small body was shutting down. "Tommy," Dennis called without turning around. "There's a sandwich in the mini-fridge. Bring it, and more water. The cold bottles." "On it." Dennis reached out slowly, giving Liza time to pull away if she needed to. She didn't. He touched the back of his hand to her forehead, a gesture he hadn't made in 15 years, not since Emily used to get fevers, and he would sit by her bed all night, checking her temperature every hour. Liza was clammy, cool and damp, the early signs of shock. "We need to get her to a doctor," Dennis said quietly. Not to Liza, to himself. A decision being made in real time. Victor stepped closer, phone still in hand. "St. Mary's is 20 minutes, but boss, if we take her there, there's gonna be questions. Cops, paperwork, they're gonna want to know why." "I don't care." The words came out sharp enough to cut. Victor stopped talking. Dennis looked at Liza again. She was so small, so fragile. A broken doll held together by nothing but terror and a teddy bear with a missing eye. She had run for her life through streets she probably didn't know, bleeding, crying, alone. She had found safety in the last place anyone would expect, in the den of a monster. And that monster was going to protect her. "Get the Escalade," Dennis said. "Pull it around back. I don't want anyone seeing us leave." Victor nodded and disappeared through the side door. Tommy returned with the sandwich and water. Dennis took them, unwrapped the sandwich, and tore off a small piece. He held it out to Liza. "Eat," he said. "Just a little. It'll help." She took the piece with trembling fingers and put it in her mouth. Chewed slowly, swallowed. Some color returned to her cheeks. Barely, just a hint, but enough. Dennis watched her eat, this child who had stumbled into his world like a stray angel with bloody wings. Behind him, his phone was already buzzing. His men were mobilizing. A net was being cast across the east side of town, searching for a white car and the predator inside it. The beast in Dennis's chest growled, patient and hungry. First, he would make sure this girl was safe. Then, he would find the man who tried to take her. And when he did, when he finally stood face to face with whoever had put that terror in Liza's eyes, there would be no mercy, no questions, no second chances. Just silence. The permanent kind. The jacket had been with Dennis longer than most of the men who worked for him. Black leather, worn soft by years of use, cracked at the elbows and scarred along the back where a knife had once sliced through it and into the flesh beneath. It smelled like motor oil, cigarette smoke, and something darker, something that clung to it from all the rooms it had entered and all the things it had witnessed. That jacket was worth more than money. It was a symbol, a flag. When Dennis Larouche walked into a room wearing that jacket, people knew who he was before he ever said a word. It had been with him through negotiations that ended in handshakes and negotiations that ended in funerals. It had kept him warm on nights when he slept in his car, running from enemies who were now buried in unmarked graves. It had caught blood, His and others. In the world Dennis lived in, that jacket was armor, and now he was taking it off. He shrugged it from his shoulders slowly, the leather creaking as it separated from his body. Beneath it, he wore a simple black t-shirt that stretched across his chest, revealing more of the ink that covered him. A sprawling mural of saints and sinners, roses and skulls, names and dates that meant nothing to anyone but him. Victor watched from across the garage, his face unreadable. Tommy had stopped moving entirely, the second half of the sandwich still in his hand. Neither of them said a word, but they understood what they were seeing. Dennis Larouche was stripping himself of his identity, laying down his armor for a child he had met 10 minutes ago. Liza looked up at him, her dark eyes wet and wide as he approached. She flinched slightly, an instinct now, a reflex born from whatever had happened on that road, but she didn't pull away. Dennis knelt in front of her again. The concrete was hard against his knees. He didn't care. "Here," he said softly, holding out the jacket. "Put this on. It'll keep you warm." She stared at it like he was offering her something impossible, like she didn't understand why anyone would give her anything. "It's too big," she whispered. "That's okay." Dennis's voice cracked slightly, and he hated himself for it. Big is good. Big means safe. He draped the jacket over her shoulders gently, carefully, the way you handle something precious and breakable. The leather swallowed her. She disappeared inside it, nothing visible but her small face and her thin arms poking out from sleeves that hung past her fingertips. Mr. Buttons poked out from the collar, his one button eye catching the light. She looked ridiculous. She looked protected. For a moment, neither of them moved. Liza sat wrapped in the armor of New Jersey's most feared crime boss, and Dennis knelt before her like a sinner in confession, waiting for absolution he didn't deserve. Then she spoke. "Are you a bad man?" The question landed like a blade between his ribs. Dennis went still. Behind him, he heard Victor shift his weight. Heard Tommy's breath catch. The whole garage seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his answer. "Are you a bad man?" He thought about all the things he had done, the orders he had given, the lives he had ended, and the lives he had ruined. He thought about the men who feared him, and the men who had tried to kill him. He thought about the graves he had filled, and the debts he had collected, and the blood he could never wash from his hands no matter how hard he tried. He thought about Emily, about the promise he had made at her tiny grave, the promise to be better, to be different, to be something other than what he was. He had broken that promise 1,000 times. Are you a bad man? Yes. The answer was yes. By any measure, by any standard, by any definition of the word, Dennis Larouche was a bad man. He had built his life on violence and fear. He had chosen power over goodness, survival over morality, darkness over light. He was everything parents warned their children about. He was the monster in the stories. But right now, looking into the eyes of this broken girl, he didn't want to be. "Not today," he whispered. Liza blinked. She didn't smile. She was too far past smiling, but something in her face shifted. Some tiny fraction of the fear loosened its grip. "Promise?" she asked. Dennis felt something crack inside him. A wall he had spent decades building, crumbling brick by brick. "Promise," he said. She pulled the jacket tighter around herself, burrowing into it like a bird nesting in safety. Her small hands gripped the lapels, her fingers disappearing into leather that had intimidated grown men. She looked up at him one more time, this monster kneeling before her, and did something he didn't expect. She reached out and touched his face. Her palm was cold and small against his stubbled cheek. A child's hand, soft and trusting, resting against skin that had felt fists and blades and worse. Dennis froze. He couldn't remember the last time someone had touched him with gentleness. Couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at him without fear. "Thank you," Liza whispered. Dennis couldn't speak. His throat had closed. His eyes burned in a way they hadn't since the day he lowered Emily's casket into the ground. He covered her small hand with his, just for a moment. His tattooed fingers, scarred and calloused, wrapped around her tiny palm. Then he stood. "Victor," he said, and his voice was steady again, hard again, the voice of the man who ran this town. "Is the car ready?" "Out back. Engine's running." Dennis looked down at Liza, wrapped in his armor, clutching her teddy bear, watching him with eyes that had already seen too much. "Let's go," he said. "We're getting you to a doctor." And as he lifted her from the workbench, carefully, gently, like she was made of glass, the jacket that had protected him for 20 years finally did what it was always meant to do. It protected someone who actually deserved it. There was $40,000 in cash sitting on the table in the back room. Unmarked bills, freshly counted, waiting to be distributed to the men who had earned it through means that would never appear on any tax return. Next to it, a ledger filled with names and numbers that could put half of Dennis's operation behind bars for the next 20 years. In the corner, 3 duffel bags containing merchandise that didn't officially exist. Dennis didn't look at any of it. "Leave it," he said. Victor hesitated. "Boss, that's $40,000 just sitting." "I said leave it." The words came out flat and final. Victor shut his mouth. Dennis was already moving towards the back door, Liza cradled against his chest. She weighed almost nothing. A bundle of bones and fear wrapped in his leather jacket, her face pressed against his shoulder, Mr. Buttons crushed between them. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid and weak, a small bird trapped in a cage of ribs. She was fading. He could feel it. "Tommy, you're with me," Dennis called over his shoulder. "Victor, lock this place down and stay on the phones. I want updates every 5 minutes. If anyone finds that white car, I want to know before they even finish dialing." He didn't wait for confirmation. He pushed through the back door into the afternoon sun, where the black Escalade sat rumbling, its engine a low growl of barely contained power. Marcus, one of Dennis's younger soldiers, stood by the driver's door, keys in hand. He stepped forward automatically, ready to take his usual position behind the wheel. Dennis walked past him. "I'm driving." Marcus blinked. In 7 years of working for Dennis Larouche, he had never once seen the boss drive himself anywhere. There were protocols, hierarchies. The boss rode in the back like a king, while others handled the mundane tasks of navigation and traffic. But Marcus wasn't stupid enough to argue. He stepped aside. Dennis opened the rear door and laid Liza across the back seat as gently as he could. She whimpered when he pulled away, her small fingers grasping at his shirt. "I'm right here," he said quietly. "I'm not leaving you. I'm just going to drive us somewhere safe, okay? Somewhere they can help you." She nodded weakly, her eyes fluttering. She was fighting to stay conscious. Dennis climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door. Tommy barely made it into the passenger side before Dennis threw the Escalade into gear and punched the accelerator. The SUV lurched forward, tires screaming against asphalt. Behind them, 2 more black Escalades fell into formation. Marco and the twins in one, 2 more of Dennis's men in the other. A convoy of darkness tearing through the streets of a town that had learned long ago to look the other way when these vehicles passed. But today, people weren't looking away. They were staring. Dennis blew through the first red light at 60 miles an hour. Horns blared. A pickup truck swerved onto the sidewalk to avoid collision, its driver shouting obscenities through the window. Dennis didn't slow down, didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the road ahead, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "Jesus Christ," Tommy muttered, bracing himself against the dashboard. "Boss, you're gonna get us killed before we get there." "Then hold on." The second red light came and went. Then the third. The Escalade roared through intersections like a bullet, the two vehicles behind matching speed, the three-car motorcade cutting through traffic like a blade through flesh. People on the sidewalks stopped to watch. Shop owners stepped out of their doorways. A woman yanked her child back from the curb, eyes wide with shock. Everyone in this town knew those black SUVs. Everyone knew what they meant. And everyone knew that when Dennis Larouche's convoy moved like this, fast, loud, reckless, something very bad was happening. But no one could have guessed what. Dennis glanced in the rearview mirror. Liza was curled in the fetal position on the back seat, his jacket pulled up to her chin. Mr. Buttons clutched to her chest. Her eyes were closed now. Her breathing was shallow. "Stay with me, kid," he growled under his breath. "Don't you dare!" He pressed the accelerator harder. The speedometer climbed past 70. St. Mary's Clinic appeared on the horizon, a small, unassuming building on the edge of the commercial district, the kind of place that handled broken arms and flu shots, not emergencies. But it was close. Closer than the hospital in the next town. And right now, close was all that mattered. Dennis cut across 2 lanes of traffic, ignoring the symphony of horns behind him, and swung the Escalade into the clinic's parking lot. The tires shrieked. The vehicle fishtailed slightly before coming to a violent stop directly in front of the entrance, diagonal across 2 handicapped spaces. He didn't care. The other 2 SUVs pulled in behind him, forming a barricade of black metal and tinted windows. Doors flew open. Men in dark clothes spilled out, taking positions around the perimeter like soldiers securing a landing zone. Dennis was already out of the driver's seat, yanking open the rear door, lifting Liza into his arms. She stirred weakly, her eyes opening for just a moment. "Where are we?" she mumbled. "Somewhere safe," Dennis said. "I promised, remember? I keep my promises." He strode toward the clinic entrance, his men falling into formation behind him. Through the glass doors, he could see the receptionist's face. Recognition first, then fear, then confusion as she spotted the child in his arms. The whole town would be talking about this within the hour. The most dangerous man in the county, breaking every traffic law, racing through the streets with a convoy of black SUVs, all to carry a little girl to a clinic. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them see. Dennis Larouche kicked open the clinic door and stepped inside, a monster carrying an angel, daring anyone to try and stop him. "I need a doctor," he announced to the frozen room. "Now." The receptionist's name was Patricia, and she had worked at St. Mary's Clinic for 11 years. In that time, she had seen car accident victims stumble through the door holding their own intestines. She had watched a man collapse from a heart attack 3 feet from her desk. She had dealt with drug overdoses, domestic violence, and one memorable afternoon when a construction worker walked in with a nail gun still embedded in his thigh. None of it had prepared her for Dennis Larouche. He stood in the doorway like a storm that had just blown in, a child wrapped in leather cradled against his chest, his tattooed arms flexing as he held her. Behind him, through the glass doors, she could see the black SUVs, the men in dark clothes, the formation that screamed organized crime louder than any confession ever could. Patricia's hand moved automatically toward the phone. Toward the police. Toward some kind of help. "Don't." One word, that's all Dennis said. But it was enough. His eyes met hers, and whatever she saw in them made her hand stop mid-reach. "I'm not here for trouble," he said. His voice was calm, but underneath it was something that made the air feel thin. "This girl needs help, that's all. She needs help, and you're going to give it to her." Patricia swallowed hard, nodded once. "I'll get Dr. Reeves." She disappeared through a side door, and within 30 seconds, the clinic erupted into motion. Nurses appeared. A gurney was wheeled out. Dr. Reeves, a tired-looking man in his 50s with gray hair and glasses that sat crooked on his nose, emerged from an examination room, already pulling on gloves. He stopped short when he saw who was holding the patient. "Mr. Larouche," he said carefully. neutral. The voice of a man who knew exactly who he was dealing with and was choosing his words like steps through a minefield. "She was attacked," Dennis said. "Someone tried to take her. She ran, fell. Her legs are locked up. She's dehydrated and going into shock. Fix her." It wasn't a request. It was an order. The same tone Dennis used when telling his men to bury a body or burn a building. But Dr. Reeves had been practicing medicine for 28 years. He had seen worse than crime bosses. He stepped forward, professional calm overriding personal fear. "Put her on the gurney. Gently." Dennis complied, laying Liza down with a tenderness that made one of the nurses do a double take. The child whimpered as she left his arms, her small hand reaching back toward him, fingers grasping at air. "Don't go," she whispered. "Please don't go." Something in Dennis's chest collapsed. He took her hand. His massive, tattooed fingers wrapped around her tiny palm, swallowing it completely. The contrast was almost grotesque, the hand that had ended lives holding the hand of a child fighting to keep hers. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I'll be right here, the whole time." Dr. Reeves looked like he wanted to object. Clinic policy, sterile environments, proper protocols. But he looked at Dennis's face, at the cold certainty in those eyes, and decided that some battles weren't worth fighting. "We need to examine her," he said. "You can stay until we take her back. Then you wait here." Dennis nodded once. A concession. For now. They wheeled Liza toward the examination room, Dennis walking alongside, never letting go of her hand. She stared up at him the whole way, her dark eyes locked on his face like he was the only fixed point in a spinning world. At the door to the examination room, the gurney stopped. "This is as far as you go," Dr. Reeves said. Dennis looked down at Liza. She was crying again, silent tears that slid down her temples and disappeared into her hair. "I'll be right outside," he told her. "Right outside that door. You call for me, I'll hear you, okay?" She nodded weakly. Her fingers tightened around his one last time. Then they wheeled her through, and the door swung shut, and Dennis Larouche was left standing alone in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and fear. He didn't sit down. He couldn't. For the first 10 minutes, he stood motionless in front of that door, arms crossed, jaw clenched, every muscle in his body coiled tight. The nurses gave him a wide berth, pressing themselves against walls as they passed, avoiding eye contact like he was a wild animal that might attack if provoked. Then he started pacing, back and forth, 5 steps in one direction. Turn, 5 steps back. The same path, over and over, wearing a groove into the linoleum with sheer repetition. Tommy appeared at some point, hovering at the edge of the waiting room like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to exist in the same space. "Boss? Any word?" Dennis didn't answer, kept pacing. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Each second stretched into an hour, each minute into a year. Dennis had waited before, for deals to close, for enemies to surface, for the right moment to strike. He knew patience. He had built an empire on it. But this was different. This wasn't business. This wasn't strategy. This was a 6-year-old girl behind a closed door, and he had no idea if she was okay, and the not knowing was eating him alive from the inside. He stopped in front of the door, pressed his palm flat against it, felt the cold of the metal against his skin. Behind that door, doctors were examining a child who had stumbled into his life 2 hours ago. A stranger. A nobody. A random little girl who meant nothing to his operation, nothing to his business, nothing to the empire he had spent decades building. But she meant something to him, and that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. The door opened. Dr. Reeves stepped out, pulling off his gloves, his face unreadable. Dennis's heart stopped. "Well?" he demanded. The doctor took a breath, and the whole world hung suspended, waiting for the answer. Dr. Reeves looked tired. The kind of tired that came from seeing too much, knowing too much, carrying the weight of other people's worst days on his shoulders for nearly 3 decades. But there was something else in his face, too. Something that made Dennis's blood run cold. "Is she alive?" The words came out before Dennis could stop them. Raw, desperate, the voice of a man standing at the edge of an abyss. Dr. Reeves held up a hand. "She's alive. She's stable." Dennis felt his knees threaten to buckle. He locked them in place through sheer force of will. "Then what?" he demanded. "What's wrong with her legs? Why couldn't she move them?" The doctor removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and let out a long breath. Behind him, a nurse hovered in the doorway, clipboard in hand, eyes carefully avoiding Dennis's face. "Mr. Larouche, what that little girl experienced today..." Dr. Reeves paused, choosing his words carefully. "Her body went through something called a protective neuromuscular response. In layman's terms, her muscles locked up to protect her from further harm." Dennis stared at him. "I don't understand." "She was severely dehydrated when you brought her in. Dangerously so. Her electrolyte levels were critically low, which can cause muscle cramping and rigidity on its own. But that's not the whole picture." The doctor put his glasses back on. "The primary cause was psychological, acute stress response. Her nervous system perceived a life-threatening situation and essentially froze. Her leg muscles contracted involuntarily and wouldn't release. It's the body's way of protecting itself when fight or flight isn't possible." Dennis processed the words slowly. "So she wasn't..." He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't form the words that had been clawing at the back of his mind since the moment Liza whispered those 6 terrible words in his garage. Dr. Reeves understood anyway. "No," he said quietly. "She wasn't assaulted. Not in that way. We did a full examination. There's no evidence of sexual trauma. Her injuries are consistent with falling while running at high speed. Scraped knees, minor abrasions, one small laceration on her forehead that didn't require stitches." The air left Dennis's lungs in a single, shuddering exhale. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Hadn't realized how tightly wound every muscle in his body had been, coiled like springs ready to snap. The relief hit him like a physical force, and for one terrible moment he thought he might actually cry. He didn't. But it was close. "She ran," Dr. Reeves continued. "Based on what she told us and the condition she was in when you brought her here, we estimate she ran nearly 2 miles. A 6-year-old child running for her life, alone, with no water, in a state of absolute terror." The doctor's voice hardened slightly. "Her body simply couldn't sustain that level of stress. By the time she reached your shop, her muscles had seized completely. She physically could not separate her legs because the spasms were too severe." Dennis leaned against the wall. He needed the support. For the first time in decades, his legs felt unsteady. "But she's okay?" he asked. "She's going to be okay?" Dr. Reeves hesitated. It was a small hesitation, barely noticeable, but Dennis caught it. "Physically, yes. We've administered IV fluids to address the dehydration, given her a mild muscle relaxant to ease the cramping. Her legs are already loosening. In a day or 2, she'll be able to walk normally again." "But?" The doctor met his eyes. "Mr. Larouche, that child is traumatized. What she experienced today, being chased, grabbed, running for her life, that doesn't just disappear because her body heals. She's going to have nightmares, panic attacks, fear responses that might not make sense to anyone but her." He paused. "She's going to need support, professional help, people who can make her feel safe again." Dennis nodded slowly. His mind was already working, already planning. He knew people, therapists who owed him favors, child psychologists who would see her for free and keep their mouths shut about who was paying the bills. "Can I see her?" Dr. Reeves studied him for a long moment. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. "She's been asking for you," he admitted. "Keep saying, 'the man with the jacket.' Won't stop until she sees you're still here." Something warm spread through Dennis's chest. Something he hadn't felt in 15 years. "She's in room 3, the doctor said. "But Mr. Larouche, we need to contact the police. And her parents. There's a predator out there who tried to abduct a child. This isn't something that can be handled unofficially." Dennis pushed off the wall, straightened his spine. The softness that had crept into his features hardened back into something more familiar. "Her mother's name is Maria Robbins," he said. "She works double shifts at a diner on 5th. My people are already tracking her down." "And the police?" Dennis's jaw tightened. "The police will get involved when I decide they get involved. Right now I have men searching for a white van and the piece of garbage who was driving it. When we find him—" He stopped himself. "When we find him, you'll hear about it on the news." Dr. Reeves opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the hallway. "Room 3. Last door on the left." Dennis moved past him without another word. His boots echoed against the linoleum as he walked, each step carrying him closer to the little girl who had stumbled into his life and cracked open something he thought he'd buried forever. She was physically unharmed. She was going to recover. And somewhere out there, a man in a white van was still breathing. Not for long. Maria Robbins had been on her feet for 9 hours when she got the call. Her ankles ached. Her lower back screamed with every step. The smell of grease and coffee had soaked so deep into her uniform, she wasn't sure she'd ever wash it out. 3 more hours until her shift ended. 3 more hours of refilling cups and forcing smiles and pretending her whole body wasn't begging her to sit down. Then her phone rang. The number was unknown. She almost didn't answer. Probably a scam call. Some robot trying to sell her car insurance she couldn't afford for a car she didn't own. But something made her pick up. Some instinct. Some maternal alarm that had been ringing faintly in the back of her mind all afternoon. "Mrs. Robbins? This is St. Mary's Clinic. Your daughter Liza has been brought in. She's stable, but you need to come immediately." The tray of dishes hit the floor before Maria even realized she'd dropped it. She didn't remember clocking out. Didn't remember running to her car. Didn't remember the drive. The red lights she blew through. The speed limits she ignored. The tears that blurred her vision so badly she could barely see the road. All she remembered was one thought, playing on loop like a broken record. "Please God. Please God. Please God. Not my baby, not my baby, not my baby." She burst through the clinic doors 17 minutes later, still wearing her apron, still smelling like the diner, mascara streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. The receptionist barely got 2 words out before Maria was pushing past her, screaming her daughter's name. "Liza! Liza!" A nurse intercepted her in the hallway, hands raised, voice calm and professional. "Mrs. Robbins, please! Your daughter is in room 3. She's okay. She's stable. But you need to calm down before—" Maria shoved past her, too. She found room 3, threw open the door. And there was Liza, lying in a hospital bed that seemed to swallow her whole, an IV drip attached to her tiny arm, her brown hair spread across the pillow like a halo. Her eyes were closed. Her chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of sleep. Mr. Buttons was tucked under her chin, one button eye catching the fluorescent light. She was alive. Maria's legs gave out. She collapsed beside the bed, her knees hitting the cold tile floor, her hands grasping at the blankets, at Liza's arm, at anything she could reach. The sobs that tore out of her weren't sounds. They were earthquakes. Her whole body shook with them. "My baby," she gasped. "Oh God, my baby girl." She pressed her face against Liza's hand, kissing her fingers, her palm, the inside of her wrist. Tears soaked the hospital sheets. Maria couldn't stop them, couldn't control anything. The terror of the past 20 minutes, the worst 20 minutes of her entire life, was pouring out of her in waves. Liza stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. "Mama?" The word broke Maria completely. "I'm here, baby." She was climbing onto the bed now, pulling Liza into her arms, holding her so tight she was afraid she might hurt her but unable to let go. "Mama's here. I'm here. I'm never letting you go. Never again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I should have been there. I should have picked you up from school. I should have—" "Mama." Liza's small hand touched her cheek. "Mama, don't cry. I'm okay. The man saved me." Maria pulled back slightly, confusion cutting through the hysteria. "What man? What are you talking about?" Liza pointed toward the corner of the room. Maria turned, and for the first time, she saw him. Dennis Larouche stood in the shadows by the window, arms crossed, watching in silence. He had been there the whole time, a sentinel, a guardian, a monster standing vigil over an angel. His face was unreadable, his posture rigid, his presence so overwhelming that Maria couldn't believe she hadn't noticed him the moment she walked in. She knew who he was. Everyone in this town knew who he was. She had heard the stories, the whispers, the warnings passed between waitresses during smoke breaks about which customers you served with a smile and which ones you avoided eye contact with entirely. Dennis Larouche was dangerous. Dennis Larouche was death wrapped in ink and leather. Dennis Larouche was the reason mothers locked their doors at night. But right now, looking at him standing guard over her daughter's hospital bed, Maria didn't see any of that. She saw the man who had saved her baby. She rose from the bed slowly, her legs still unsteady, her face still wet with tears. She crossed the room in 3 steps and stopped directly in front of him. Dennis didn't move. Didn't speak. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on some point over her shoulder, like he couldn't quite bring himself to meet her gaze. Maria reached out and took his hand. The contrast was almost absurd. Her small, work-roughened fingers wrapped around his massive, tattooed fist. She could feel the scars on his knuckles, could see the ink crawling up his wrist, disappearing beneath his sleeve, could sense the violence coiled inside him like a spring. She didn't care. "Thank you," she whispered. 2 words, that was all. But she poured everything into them, every ounce of gratitude, every fragment of relief, every prayer she had screamed during that desperate drive to the clinic. Dennis's hand trembled slightly in her grip. His throat worked, like he was trying to swallow something that wouldn't go down. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Because if he opened his mouth right now, if he tried to form even a single word, he was going to break. And Dennis Larouche hadn't broken in front of another person since the day he buried his daughter. So he just nodded. Once. A small, tight movement. Maria squeezed his hand one more time, then turned back to Liza. And Dennis remained where he was, standing guard in the shadows, watching a mother hold her child, feeling something crack open in his chest that he had no idea how to close. 3 months changed everything, and nothing at all. The leaves had turned since that afternoon in the garage. Summer had surrendered to autumn, painting the trees in shades of amber and rust, carpeting the ground with colors that crunched underfoot. The air had grown crisp, carrying the smell of wood smoke and the promise of early frost. And in Riverside Park, on a Tuesday afternoon painted gold by the late October sun, a little girl was laughing. Liza Robbins ran across the playground like she had never known fear. Her brown hair flew behind her, escaping from the ponytail her mother had carefully tied that morning. Her pink jacket, new, bought to replace the dress that had been ruined, billowed as she pumped her legs, racing toward the swings with the kind of reckless joy that only children possess. Her knees had healed. The scabs had fallen away weeks ago, leaving behind skin that was smooth and unmarked, no evidence of the concrete that had torn it open. Her legs moved freely now, carrying her wherever she wanted to go, the muscle spasms a distant memory that visited only occasionally in nightmares that came less and less frequently. She was whole again. Or as whole as a child could be, after what she had survived. Maria sat on a wooden bench at the edge of the playground, a paper cup of coffee warming her hands. She hadn't taken her eyes off Liza since they arrived. Probably wouldn't until they left. Some things had changed in the past 3 months, too. Maria had cut her hours at the diner, taken a job with better pay and a schedule that let her pick Liza up from school every single day. No more walking home alone. No more trusting that 3 blocks was safe enough. The world had taught her otherwise. But today, watching her daughter swing higher and higher, hearing that laugh echo across the park, Maria allowed herself to breathe. To believe, just for a moment, that everything was going to be okay. She didn't notice the black SUV parked across the street. But Dennis did. He noticed everything. He sat in the driver's seat, engine off, window cracked just enough to let in the autumn air. From this angle, he had a clear view of the entire playground, every entrance, every exit, every shadow where someone could hide. Old habits, the kind that kept men like him alive. But he wasn't here for business, wasn't here to watch for enemies or plan for threats. He was here for her. Liza reached the peak of her swing and let go, launching herself into the air with a shriek of delight. For one heart-stopping moment, she was flying, arms spread wide, face turned toward the sky, completely free. Then gravity claimed her, and she landed in the wood chips with a stumble and a giggle, already scrambling to her feet to do it again. Dennis felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for 3 months, waiting, watching, making sure. The man in the white van had been found. His name was Gerald Whitmore, 43 years old. No prior record. A youth pastor at a church 2 towns over, beloved by his congregation, trusted by parents who handed their children over to him without a second thought. He had been hunting in this area for months, the police later discovered. Liza wasn't his first attempt. She was just the first one who got away. The details of what happened to Gerald Whitmore would never appear in any police report. There was no police report. There was only a shallow grave in a forest that no one visited, and a white van that had been crushed into a cube of metal at a scrapyard owned by one of Dennis's associates. Gerald Whitmore had simply disappeared. The kind of disappearance that happened sometimes in towns where men like Dennis Larouche operated. The kind that no one asked questions about, because asking questions was dangerous. The congregation mourned their missing pastor, held vigils, prayed for his safe return. Dennis felt nothing. Some monsters deserved to meet other monsters. That was the natural order of things. And Dennis had made sure that Gerald Whitmore's last hours on Earth were educational, had made sure he understood exactly why he was dying, and exactly who he had tried to take. But that was over now. Finished. Buried in every sense of the word. What mattered was this: a little girl was safe. Liza climbed back onto the swing, pumping her legs to build momentum again. The chains creaked rhythmically, a sound like a heartbeat, steady and alive. She was singing something. Dennis couldn't hear the words from this distance, but he could see her lips moving, could see the joy radiating from her like light. She had no idea he was there. None of them did. Not Liza, not Maria, not the other parents scattered around the playground. Dennis was invisible, the way he preferred to be. A shadow watching over a child who had stumbled into his darkness and somehow brought light. He came here twice a week, sometimes more. Never approached, never made himself known. Just watched from a distance, making sure she was okay, making sure no other shadows crept too close. His men thought he had gone soft. Let them think it. They didn't understand what had happened in that garage 3 months ago. Didn't understand that a broken little girl clutching a teddy bear had done something that enemies and allies alike had failed to do for 20 years. She had reminded him that he was human. Dennis reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. Creased at the corners, faded by time, handled so often the edges had gone soft. Emily smiled up at him from the image, frozen forever at 6 years old, her brown hair in pigtails, her eyes full of a future she would never see. He looked at the photograph, then at Liza, swinging toward the sky. He couldn't save his daughter. That wound would never heal, no matter how many years passed or how many graves he filled. Emily was gone, and nothing, no amount of money, power, or violence could bring her back. But he could save this one. He could watch from the shadows, a monster standing guard, making sure that Liza Robbins grew up safe and whole and free, making sure that no other predator ever got close enough to dim that light in her eyes. It wasn't redemption. Dennis didn't believe in redemption, not for men like him, but it was something. Liza jumped from the swing again, soaring through the autumn air, laughing like the world had never hurt her. And in a black SUV across the street, a monster watched her fly, and felt something that might have been love. Sometimes the people society fears the most are the ones who understand protection better than anyone. Kindness doesn't always wear a clean face. Sometimes it has tattoos, a criminal record, and a heart buried so deep it takes a child's tears to find it.